Okay, hello and welcome to ALN Thursday at 4. Thank you all for being here on this August 20th, 2020. I'm Nick Kanoki, the producer of ALN Thursday at 4, where every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we put a light on important and relevant asset leadership and asset management topics. One note before I begin, we'd like to thank our organizational members shown here. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Dieter and Jack Dempsey.
All right. Well, thanks, and welcome everybody tuning in now and joining us, and also to people that find this at some point in the future. I have to say, from an ALN perspective, we're having a lot of fun doing these productions every week, and hopefully we're getting a little better at it every week. But for those new to this, the idea is to be a more informal chat, actually very relevant for today, as we've often, for the last several years, thanks to the effort of Jack Dempsey, our guest today, had events at the National Academy of Sciences on Constitution Avenue in Washington. It's an amazing place. But like at all conferences, a lot of the best conversations would happen during the breaks in the hallway, small groups of people, or in individual discussions. So these chats are part of our way to try to recreate that a little bit, to rather than be in a presentation, but just to get to know some of the people in the asset management community and what they're thinking about. And you'll also can chat and ask some questions, by typing them in the Q&A and chat. And we'll try to get to some of those at the end. But without further ado, I'm Jim Dieter, CEO of the Asset Leadership Network. And my background today is, those that have watched some know that I'm a photographer and do some I've used some of my photographs, but today, this is one I lifted from the internet. We'll ask in a minute, we'll ask Jack Dempsey if he knows what that is, because I'm pretty sure he does, and has a story for it. But Jack Dempsey has been a huge supporter and contributor to the Asset Leadership Network for as long as we've been around, and has a varied and very dynamic and interesting career in asset management. So we'll get to some of those things today, but only the tip of the iceberg, I'm afraid, because Jack's got a lot of interesting information to share and things we can talk about. So welcome, Jack Dempsey. And what do you think of that? What is that background?
Well, it's McSorley's, and we talk about a chat in the hallway around the water cooler, and looking at your backdrop. I was like, what about the one at the bar stool? I mean, there's a lot of business conducted there as well. For those who don't know, McSorley's, it's a place down on 7th Street in Lower Manhattan. It's a place also where 5 generations of my family has visited. So all of us come from somewhere, and our families come from somewhere, and there's a long progression of thinking and things that happen. And McSorley's is a bar that 5 generations of my family have been through. So great-great-grandfather, grandfather, father, myself, and now my children's, which some of them are of legal drinking age. So it's a nice place to visit if you ever get to Manhattan. There's lots of little good places to sneak into. So looking forward to the ability to do that after this pandemic thing plays through and we get back to a little bit more of a normal, or maybe a new normal. So thanks, Jim, for putting that up there. It's definitely always a nice warm memory for me. Not that like hanging on bars a lot, but yeah, there's a family story there. Thank you.
They're putting a note up, Jack, saying that your voice is coming across a little strong, and it's distorting a little bit. So maybe talk a little softer. That could be hard, but I think you're probably using your Coast Guard voice. So what I wanted to start with was to ask you, and I think I might make this a regular feature, is, so what's your origin story as an asset management person? How did you get started in this?
So it's kind of simple. In high school, I worked for a mason, doing mason things, building brick walls and all that. He convinced me to become a civil engineer, and along those lines, that involved joining went to the Coast Guard Academy. And interestingly enough, they have ships. I just wanted to be a civil engineer, and in fact, that's what I did. There's really nothing in my career that ever made the pages, and I was always happy to provide support to the operators in that capacity. But about the midpoint of my career, maybe a little bit more of the earlier point of my career, I was managing a construction project, a medical clinic in Los Angeles. For those who are familiar, Long Beach, and there's San Pedro is kind of the neck getting into the port. Redondo Beach is like on the other side, so some of you are kind of familiar with that area. But I was building a building. It was a fun building outside. We're doing a foundation. I got a call from a program manager in Coast Guard headquarters, and said we decided we're going to cancel this project. And I was stumped. There's been years and years of work going into the planning of this building. In fact, this building was the fifth in a progression of what would end up being 5 major capital kind of MILCON projects in the DoD sense. Improving the site to move some operational assets there, some large cutters from the Coast Guard. And they decided that it's not the right place to put a cutter. And simply, they were right. What you have in a port, you got kind of a lot of port activities going on and a lot of characters running around the port. And at the end of this port is a spit, San Pedro. And to get to the Coast Guard base, you have to drive into a federal prison with all the Constantine wire, and there's a controlled access. You make a right-hand turn into this prison compound, and you show up at the Coast Guard base. And if you look out to sea, it looks kind of really nice, but if you look everything around you, it's not so nice. So the circumstances were, you have these large operational cutters that are going to have effectively a lot of junior enlisted people who effectively just graduated high school, went to boot camp. They're all excited about joining the Coast Guard. And they're going to be stationed on these cutters. They're not going to have any money or not enough money to have a car or to go anyplace. So they would be more or less in prison for 3 years. When you're underway, it's busy. It's kind of like prison, someone would kind of explain that way. So you have a bunch of really motivated, ambitious, intelligent young people who are joining the Coast Guard, and we're going to have their first experience in Coast Guard at this location. So that was the reason why they decided that as soon as they figured that out, that they needed to not have those cutters there. And it just, like when I kind of figured that out, I'm like, how does this happen? Well, literally a decade of work, millions and millions of dollars, people who worked a good portion of their career to make all this happen. And right towards the end, they said, it's not going to work out. And I basically spent the rest of my career trying to answer, why does this happen? And learned that that's actually an asset management problem to solve. And it was that event. On that day, I could almost tell you exactly where I stood when I got the phone call. It was like a bolt of lightning. Changed my career, and it took me about probably 7 or 8 years to figure out that I had changed that day. But eventually I learned more about asset management, and that brings me here today. So everybody's got a story.
That's a great story. So one of the stories you've shared with me in the past, we haven't talked about it in a while, was one of your other duties as assigned in the Coast Guard had to do with being a secretary for a committee. Was that at the National Academies? Was that where that was?
So yeah, there was so I fast forward a little bit. I got into grad school about mid-career. I was a late bloomer. Most people would kind of get to grad school a bit earlier in the career, but I was about mid-career officer. Got to grad school. I started doing some research and into economic models, again, to solve the problem that stumped me in San Pedro, and started kind of shooting my mouth off about how to fix things. Didn't realize I was asking for orders to headquarters. So, learned another lesson that day. Sometimes it's better to just keep your mouth shut. But yeah, I got to headquarters, and it was a interesting place. You learn a lot about a bureaucracy. I wasn't really excited about that aspect of it, but you also learn how large organizations operate. And my job was to try to make some of those ideas work. And along those lines, the Coast Guard did get involved with the Federal Facilities Council, which is a council, part of the National Academies. Met a lot of intelligent people, a lot of mentors that kind of showed me how to think out of the box, so to speak. And that led to a role as a committee member, or actually chaired a committee on emerging technology there for 3 years. And that experience really opened my eyes to how to affect change, not just how a bureaucracy works, but how to think about things in a different way and figure out how to make change happen. So again, it's, the path you follow kind of informs your next step. And yeah, that was a pivotal moment in my career when that opportunity presented itself.
So I know you're working on a report for the National Academies. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I know it hasn't been published yet, so it's under wraps. Is that right?
So yeah, fast forward another decade or so, and so I have an opportunity right now. I'm the vice chair of a committee on a strategy to renew federal facilities. For some of those who are familiar with the program there, I mean, everybody's heard about 2 to 4% of PRV is kind of a benchmark in terms of the maintenance money that should be budgeted for a facility portfolio. It's kind of a standard of practice. That was published in a National Academies report 30 years ago. And since then, the Board of Infrastructure and Constructed Environment, in many ways, working with the Federal Facilities Council, there's a relationship there, has published a series of reports over the last 30 years. And we're currently working on the 8th report in that series. The last report was predicting outcomes of investments in maintenance and repair. That was published in 2012. And a seminal moment or seminal aspect of that report was it basically established the need for knowledge-based condition assessments and really made the case that resulted in builder becoming a policy in DoD. So those who work in the facilities environment in the federal sector would be familiar with some of the software systems produced there. So these reports are pretty influential as they evolve. And effectively our problem statements right now, we're nearing completion, authoring the document, is where does this go? Okay, so when you have all these moving parts and you have all these requirements and you have exponentially growing deferred maintenance backlogs, how do you make sense of that? So our report is titled Strategies to Renew Federal Facilities. I think it's a pretty exciting report. I mean, especially if you like asset management. So that will be out soon. So right now I really can't say too much about the findings, but it is a progression of thinking, really kind of building on how to implement OMB Circular A11, the Capital Programming Guide, which is really how do you formulate a budget to support funding and investments in facilities. And in this report, we'll talk about strategies that support that.
Now let's see, I know there's 2 things you dropped in there. Builder is a software package, right?
It is, yep. It's an assessment tool and to some extent a forecasting tool. What are your requirements for maintenance in the future? And
I also saw a comment that you said PRV, and not everybody might not know what that is.
Good. It's we all have jargon. Present replacement value. So when you want to value your portfolio facilities in the federal sector, the typical valuation is called present replacement value, which is meant to be the equivalent on if you bought new facilities for each of your buildings or infrastructure, structures, transportation, roads. It would cost, what would that cost? And that's the present replacement value of an asset. And then of course you add that up and you end up with a present replacement value of your portfolio of facility assets.
Good. Well now, so where we got involved was with ISO 55000. And of course, the ALN, is an outgrowth of the US tag to TC 251 for ISO 55000 to help promote management systems approach to asset management. And there's a lot going on with that now. Can you And you tell people what your role is and what you see coming and what they can expect a little bit.
Certainly. And first, Jim, I don't know if I should thank you or you owe me a beer at that bar you're sitting at right now. Kind of being curious about these things. Yeah, I wanted to learn more about it, and of course, got to meet you, and got involved with ALN very early on, and was also introduced to ISO 55000, which is a management systems standard on asset management. Most people are probably more familiar with ISO 9000 on quality management. But today there's about 80 standards, maybe about 15 or so specific areas where these standards kind of define just workings of how a management system works. So along the way, I got involved with the US TAG, Technical Advisory Group, which represents the United States on the ISO technical committee that's responsible for that standard, that body of standards, and have been now twice elected the convener of the product improvement work group, which is, standards writing, I'll admit, isn't the most exciting things. I think what really becomes exciting about standards is the benefits that are generated. Imagine if we knew how to write down sentences and communicate, how to provide data syntax in terms of databases working and sharing data and information like that. So these standards basically provide kind of rules of engagement on how a system works to manage assets. And the product improvement work group is focused on getting feedback and collecting ideas on how to improve that body of work. So it's I'll say fascinating work, but there's some caveats on that. And thankfully, at least we have fun along the way writing standards. So.
Wow. Yeah, well, it used to be, of course, it had always been one of the, the bonus, the excitement of being on an ISO committee was that they always picked the coolest places in the world to go to. Like I mentioned, I've been to Prague and South Africa and game reserves and Japan, and just like, wow, Sweden. Yeah, we hosted a couple of them here, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. To try to explain to people the sausage making of standards is pretty remarkable. So what can people expect with, I think you're specifically working on the zero document, right? 55.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, just a little bit of kind of context here. The one thing, when I first started reading these standards, they're very cryptic, challenging. I mean, which means they're basically highly structured. You really kind of have to understand the syntax of how the standard's written. Personally, for me, it took some time, even a couple of years, to really appreciate what it was saying. Part of that is also understanding what it doesn't say. The standards don't tell you how to implement an asset management system. It's really left to professional organizations such as ALN to kind of help others understand how to take the structure, the standard, and apply it its most effective to your circumstances. The big standard, or at least the big standard from the beginning, is the 55001 standard, and it's asset management system requirements. And it details in a very structured way basically all the characteristics, all the evidence-based demonstrations that an asset management system should have. If I like to say, if you operated like a Wawa or 7-Eleven, and you, as a proprietor of that organization or that establishment, can keep the doors open for 2 years, you're about 85, maybe 90% conforming to a successful management system. You understand where the customers come from. You understand what they need. You can meet performance requirements in terms of regulatory, safety. You got health and safety inspections coming in. So if you can run a business, something like that, you're using management system practices. What a management system standard, and we're talking about ISO 55001, takes you from that 85%, 90%, which is where most people can kind of get by, and gives you the ability and the discipline to raise your capabilities higher, meaning perform. And sometimes that's necessary for assurances. You have stakeholders, for example, you're providing water, you're a water utility, and you need to deliver water to customers. Well, they want to know it's safe drinking water. They want to know that you're making good use of what you're charging them, meaning you're investing in that infrastructure for the future. And there's obviously a lot of examples where that doesn't happen. So asset management becomes a big, important part of the circumstance. 55001 defines requirements, kind of like it's basically making sure if you're managing your assets, your portfolio of assets, that you're managing it the right way. Basically you're getting things done correctly. You're kind of dotting your I's, crossing your T's. Things are going to keep on working. We're talking about 55,000, which is its sister standard. And that standard has been kind of like an introduction to 55,001. And it talks about, a little bit of the benefits of asset management. It touches on some principles. It provides some context of how it fits into other management systems. Risk management is an important aspect. And the work we're starting right now as we look to update these standards is to evolve that and take more of a principle-based approach. So the view here is that principles make sure the right things get done, and requirements make sure things get done right. And it's kind of a yin and yang relationship where if you can pull those together, we believe, and this is where the Technical Committee 251, the ISO committee that manages these standards, thinks that this is something that's going to be helpful to those who want to pick up their game in asset management, which is ultimately delivering value to your stakeholders, to your clients. It could be in the form of security, profitability. It could be being competitive. A lot of federal governments just want to make sure that what they're doing is providing good service to the public. So, lots of moving parts there. It's a little bit in the weeds in terms of the standard, but if you want to get involved, that's how you do it. That's where you start. That's the root cause for what we believe is going to be something that's going to help many people in this world better manage their assets.
Well, as you know, for the development process, I was on the 55,000 committee, and I jumped in front of trains, and I tilted at windmills, and I shot people, I got shot. It could be messy, but I can look at that document, and it's pretty exciting to know that. First, as a representative of the United States, and I was the head of the delegation. It's just like, wow, that's really awesome. And I'm sure you must feel that kind of, it's an honor and a privilege, but it's also a responsibility to be representing the United States and leading this an international group in this committee to develop, an improvement and revision to this standard. Now, do you think, is there anything going to be drastically different, do you think? And people need to think, well, do I need to worry about how it's going to be different? Or you think it'll just be better? Or what do you think?
Well, two things. First, Jim, thanks for the compliment. I think myself and I think all those who are involved are there for the right reason. They're volunteers, and they really want to make a contribution to try to make things better. I mean, we all have day jobs, so to speak. So it supports that. So there's, it's kind of a labor of love in that regard. On your question, I think the answer is, I would say, a little bit of both yes and no. It's no because I think the foundation of the standard, that's the 55,000 and 55,001, have demonstrated to be very successful. So there's a lot of interest to keep the stability in those standards, the clarity in those standards. It takes a long time to learn and understand how to apply those standards. So if there's dramatic shifts, it could be very disruptive, in fact, very unproductive supporting the advancement of asset management. I will say yes, in that I think there's a growing appreciation and understanding that a principle-based approach is something that will add value to the conversation. For example, a lot of the people I'm working with, I typically, most of my clients from the federal sector, if you walk in, particularly with executive leadership, and you start explaining to them there's this detailed standard and you got to kind of get conform, and if they remember anything about ISO 9000, they're still not over that hangover. So they're kind of like, I'm not really ready to do that. But everywhere I go, and obviously I'm kind of in the business of asset management, there is a strong interest. There's a foundational interest. Like, I think we can do things better around here. Where do I go to figure that out? So I think particularly in the 55,000 document, we're going to look at how to clarify and simplify what are the principles that really work, really kind of what resonates with people that seem to help them make sure that they get the right thing done. There's a cliche that you can pass one of these management system standards by pencil whipping the material, and okay, I mean, there's examples of that, and you can do that if you're following all the requirements and make sure you get the paperwork and that kind of stuff. But I think together, I think there seems to be a growing understanding and agreement that balancing, how to do things right with getting the right things done is a good formula. So I think the area where I think there will be some progress made is clarifying what are the principles that make these things work, and try to move forward from there.
Hey, Jack, we're running out of time here, but we had a question. Well, we had two questions actually. Quickly, do you want to talk about, someone asked about your shirt? You want to talk about Definitive Logic?
I'd be happy to, certainly. Definitive Logic is a small technology company. We're based out of Arlington. Our CEO likes to kind of say we punch above our weight, so to speak. So Definitive Logic is really about kind of the easy button answers. We deliver technologies. People talk about better, faster, cheaper, pick two, and the third one you just have to accept. Our mantra is easy. Easy faster, easy better, easy cheaper, which is really a value discussion. So we deliver services that accelerate data and information. As examples, we've built the technology stack for the financial system that the U.S. Air Force uses. We're currently doing the same for the Department of Homeland Security. We've built out and digitized the entire capital planning process for the U.S. Air Force. So even though we're a small company, we have focused our attention, kind of laser beam, on what's the easy answer to deliver technologies to make things happen. And I'm happy to say we're very active in the area of asset management, which is a perfect combination for me.
That's great, Jack. Well, we want to respect people's time, so we're going to just show some closing slides here. Thanks again, Jack Dempsey. If any of you guys out there want to continue this conversation, feel free to reach out to any of us. webinar@assetleadership.net is a good email. Otherwise, we just want to thank kind of the organizational members again, and see you all next week.